So this is going to be video number 2 on the 1960 Mini Cooper carbon fiber chassis build. My name is Charles Meyer, and this is a project that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and it's an accumulation of past projects that I've had kind of coming together in my brain and becoming this new project. So the last time we started the other video, the first video, this car was a right side up, and essentially now it's upside down because I'm working on adding strength to the underside of the car, adding strength to the roof, adding some strength to the lower portion of the dash, adding some strength to the rear shelf and the back end of the car, because ultimately I'm going to anchor my suspension into some unique locations, which you'll see in the near future. Okay, so this part that we worked on in the last couple of weeks is the bottom of the dash, essentially. So I've turned the car upside down and I'm reinforcing the bottom to basically seal it from oxidation. And then in addition to that, we want to add some support to the top side of the dash because I'm planning on mounting the coilover shock setup in there. Provided I have room, that's my agenda today. In addition to that, when we took out the floor, we found that this portion underneath the door was the most oxidized and the weakest point. So we've added in some 1 by 1, it's actually 1.25 by 1.25 square tube. And it's just sitting in here at the moment, but I'm eventually going to weld this back in and strengthen the bottom side of both doors. And then when the car is flipped over onto the carbon fiber chassis, we're going to mount through here to anchor into the chassis. So the roof, we took out all the old paint, and instead of putting a sealer down first or a primer down first, we decided to fiberglass in the bottom side of the roof. I don't want to put together a full steel cage inside this car because it's basically going to be mostly carbon fiber, and the steel shell is kind of going to be like an RC car. But I want to add some integrity to it in case I did flip the car or crash or whatever. So I've added some fiberglass here. I've put some foam all the way around the perimeter. So I've kind of sealed it and done my best to add some integrity back into the chassis. We're going to add a carbon fiber headliner, which you'll see in a minute. And then ultimately it's going to have a carbon fiber roof, which you'll also see in a minute. So on the back here, I did another experiment in a sense. On the underside here, this is the rear shelf, I'm calling it. And when the car is right side up, you'll be able to see it through the back window. And essentially I'm adding strength to the bottom side of this because I'm going to go ahead and put my coilover assembly on the top of this rear shelf. So I wanted to add some strength to the back side of the car. So I've put a couple layers of fiberglass here. And right now I actually have one of my carbon fiber trunks in here to sort of hold the shape. And we're going to clean this all up and sand this all down. But instead of trying to weld in tubes and add structure back in with more metal, I've done it with fiberglass. Okay, so I'm not sure I mentioned it before, but essentially what we did is we made a mold of the roof to be able to make a carbon fiber cap that's going to go over the top of the car. And so we did in fact make that mold. And the way we did it is we took the metal roof on the car, which actually was in really good shape, and we completely primered it and we polished it and we turned that into a master. The master makes the mold makes the part. And so this is the part that will be the cap. So while the roof was in good shape, essentially what we decided to do was make a part off of the roof, which is the master. And so we have this part now, and we decided to use that as a headliner. So it came out really pretty nice. I've got one little tiny blem here that we're going to go ahead and basically sand out and then add some resin to, sand it, and buff it. And then we're going to trim this whole perimeter and then set this down into the shell on top of the fiberglass. So when you're sitting in the car, you'll see a nice finished carbon fiber headliner. So carbon fiber top, carbon fiber headliner roof. So this plate here actually is going to ultimately be the rear shelf that the shock assembly is going to sit on. The coilover shock setup is going to sit on top of this plate. So we just finished it. It's an epoxy part. It's got about 50 layers of carbon fiber on it to give us the thickness. And we ultimately clear coated it with a polyurethane paint, a nice PPG polyurethane paint, so that it's going to see some UV through the back window. I wanted to make sure it protected it because the epoxy would typically yellow out, but this came out pretty nice. And then this shock assembly is essentially going to be sitting on top of it. So within this build, I have this strange concept of trying to mix British design with my own ideas, and some sort of a combination will ultimately come out hopefully nice. So one of these combination ideas is I end up having these wheels made. They're completely billet center aluminum 6061. The outer rim halves are BBS. It's a 16 by 9 3/4 width, and I'm going to run a 245 tire on it. The design of the wheel is from the British Lola T70, which raced in the 60s Can-Am series. And it's not exactly the same, but in fact, my car will have knockoff hubs. And so it won't be a typical lug pattern. It'll just be knockoffs like that car. And so I tried to somewhat mimic that design from the British. The spring and shock package here, this is a little bit of a mock-up. These rocker arms aren't exactly accurate as to how it's going to sit on the display. In the next chapter or two, next video or two, I hope to have this assembly done so that I can show you what it's all going to look like. But it's going to be something like this. One shock is going to be controlling bump and rebound, and the other shock is going to be controlling roll. So, yeah, these would be the two rear shocks, Integra adjustable shocks with UPG10 springs from Renton Coil. And then this essentially is one of the front shocks, and I'm using a titanium spring for that, which is it's pretty light. They're only a few ounces. So the spring is more dynamic. The titanium spring is more dynamic than chrome silica. So I'm hoping with all these cool little components that we'll have a very nimble race car. Street car. Race car for the street. The next thing here is keeping with the British theme from another project I had. I have these AP racing calipers. So essentially I'm going to use AP racing calipers on these. This is a little bit of a strange combination. Willwood rotors and hats. So this combination works really well for my idea of running a knockoff. I can get these components here in the States. The knockoff assembly in this hat pattern is from a sprint car. These rotors are 12-inch rotors by 1 1/8 inches. So it's a good monster size brake package for this car. And I'll be running the same brakes, rotors, calipers on all four corners. Last piece for today is this rear. If we were in the UK, I suppose it would be the boot. And we made this. We made our own mold off the original car that I had. I had a fiberglass part. It didn't fit so great, but we did some work to get it to fit the shell that I have. We made a mold off that, and I've actually made 4 or 5 carbon fiber, what I'm going to call trunks, to get to this one. So this one is not completely finished, but we did spray it with a nice polyurethane PPG paint, and I planned on sanding it down and buffing it. And the other thing that's cool about it is when we were done making the mold, we also had the plug or the master, and I made a part off of the master. So now I've got a finished inside of the trunk as well as having the finished outside of the trunk. I still need to work on doing some detail work and paint the inside, but I'm going to wait till we get final finish and make sure the whole seal and everything's done and right. So that's it for today's video. I hope that you guys are enjoying the craziness that's coming out of this shop and the new projects and what the Mini Cooper is going to ultimately develop into. So at this point, hopefully you'll subscribe to the channel and hit your alert buttons to be able to get notifications for when the next video comes. Feel free to give me comments, questions, and let me know what you think of the project or suggestions. I'm all ears. So until next time.